the thing I want to say about autism is it's got a whole big range of severities. A lot of kids can look really bad when they're 3, and there's a lot of them that you work on them with therapy, you pull them out of it. Half of Silicon Valley's got autism. I am not kidding. I also want to emphasize that geeks, nerds, and mild autism is the same thing. And I want to see these kids be successful. I worked on many big projects for large companies. I worked with steel workers, the weirdest guy in the shop. He was the most creative guy in the shop. He was either dyslexic or he had mild autism. And one of the worst things the schools have done is taken out all the hands-on classes. There's a lot of kids out there getting addicted to video games, and they ought to be getting addicted to a skilled trade. I'm going to estimate that about 25% of these kids ought to be in a skilled trade. There's a whole bunch of them that ought to be doing computer science, and there's a whole lot of others that would be good in sales and a whole bunch of other jobs. Let's get into talking about animals. Fear. It's a strong stressor. Why are these dogs turning gray by the age of 4? The study was done by a really good colleague of mine, Camille King. She's not a student. She's my non-matriculated student. She does super good research. This was not an easy study, but she found that impulsive dogs, dogs that are afraid of new things, dogs home alone too much, greater risk of turning gray before they're 4 years old. And that is an evidence-based journal article. Now, we've got a situation here where the horse is getting really stressed because the saddle all of a sudden just fell off. That's sudden novelty. Sudden novelty can be very stressful. And there's an interaction with genetics. If the animal has high-strung genetics, sudden novelty is more scary than if the animal has calm genetics. Common thing people will say is, my horse was fine at home, he went crazy at the show. Or my steer went crazy at the show. The problem is, there's a lot of new things at that show, like flags, bikes, and balloons. And you need to just get them gradually introduced to that. See, a lot of animals live too sheltered a life. There was an interesting study done in the UK, and cats that stay inside were more likely to bite and scratch a veterinarian than cats that went outside. Because the indoor cats just didn't get exposed to very many things. You know, get your animal used to different vehicles, different people, so you don't have that fear of novelty. Well, got a little low-stress handling right there, completely calm. And a basic principle is a calm animal, no matter what it is, dog, cat, horse, is much easier to handle than an afraid, excited, terrified animal. Give it half an hour to calm down. So you bring the horse into the vet clinic and he goes berserk, put him in the stall for half an hour, let him calm back down. Cat goes, has a bad time at the vet, let it calm back down. Can't emphasize that enough. And people need to get good at looking at signs animals have. Watch with horses and cattle, which way they're pointing their ears. What are they looking at? What are they orienting towards? You see, an animal doesn't think in words. An animal lives in a sensory-based world. And being a visual thinker, that helped in my work with animals. Because I thought about, well, what are cattle seeing when they're going through the chute? And I found if I got rid of things like a chain hanging down in the chute, then the cattle would walk through it. But I want to get you to be a whole lot more observant. Observant to detail. When you think in words, you tend to overgeneralize. And I find that people overgeneralize about autism problems. They overgeneralize about animal behavior. You know, they might say, well, my dog's crazy, what do I do about it? Or my horse is crazy. Or they might say, what do I do about autistic kids in the classroom? Well, I don't know. I have to find out the crazy dog, for example. Maybe he's crazy happy. Maybe he's crazy nasty biting somebody. You see, I have to have a whole lot more information. Okay, there's a kid in the classroom with a problem. Is he getting bullied? Man, I can tell you, bullying was a big, big, big problem for me. And the only places I was not bullied when I was a teenager was where there was a shared interest. Horseback riding, a really big shared interest. Another big shared interest was model rockets and electronics. You know, for another kid, it could be the school play. It could be band. Get kids, you know, into shared interest things. Another big problem I'm seeing with a lot of kids labeled autistic, dyslexic, ADHD, some other label they want to slap on them that are just a bit weird, is not learning how to work. A lot of the people that I worked with in skilled trades had paper routes when they were 11. They learned how to work. And when they get to middle school, they need to learn how to do a job outside the home. Well, they can clean horse stalls for the next door neighbors or walk a dog. And they're 15, that's the legal age in this state, a real job. Got to learn how to work. This is one of the biggest problems because academic skills and work skills are not the same skills. So I was a terrible student. I got kicked out of 9th grade for fighting. And I went away to a special boarding school, and I spent the first 3 years running their horse barn. Didn't do any studying, but I learned how to work. Another thing they never allowed was recluse in the room. We can't let these kids be getting addicted to video games. No recluses in the room. They got to get out doing things. We give them choices. You know, they can do this activity or that activity, but you got to get them out of the house. All right, what are some signs that a horse is starting to get upset? Tail switching. That's your first warning. And it goes faster and faster, and then kaboom, he books. Eye white showing, he's really getting scared. Ears pinned back, and when they start pooping, you've scared the you-know-what out of them. And just the other day, I was at a big conference, a big dairy conference, and I had a dairyman come up to me. He says, I started treating my cows a whole lot better, and they don't mess up the parlor the way they used to. But the first thing with horses people need to recognize is heads up, quivering, and you get that tail switching. And cattle do it too. Better watch that. Tail up in the bison, not happy. But in the goat, the tail's up and everything's fine. This is where you can get species differences. And here's a dog with a bad case of white eye, really terrified. This is actually a scientifically validated measure. And it's really important to make your dog's first experience at the vet's office a good first experience, like give them some treats. Look at how the horse and the zebra have an ear on each other, and then the other ear is on me. And when the ears are going around like the airport radar, yeah, that's not a sign of a calm animal. When the ears are just going switching every which way. Oh, don't use nose tongues, that's terrible. Bad case of white eye. But fear is a proper scientific word. 20 years ago, when I wrote a journal article, I wasn't allowed to use the word fear. I had to call it agitation or excitement. You see, fear has been a proper scientific word in the neuroscience literature for decades. This is where we get silos in science. This just basically shows you that when you handle animals badly, it really messes up their physiology. I like to show this slide to labs where they use pigs as an experimental animal. Now, I got to get back to this dog right here. I think it's absolutely stupid to say that animals don't have emotions. Fortunately, people are getting over that. All right, let's just look at the facts. Prozac works in dogs. That is a fact. And the emotion systems in the brain are the same in dogs and horses and people. And the main difference is that people have a gigantic computer sitting up here. But the basic emotions are similar. Now, I really like this. This is the Jack Panskep Basic Emotional Systems. This has been in the neuroscience literature for a long, long time. And a lot of behavior can be explained with this. Now, animals have genetic differences in the behavior. And imagine each one of these emotional traits is a knob on a music mixing board. High or low fear, high or low anger, high or low separation distress, high or low exploration. And genetics will set the music mixing board at a certain level, and then environment can also affect it. Horses that have been abused, that up-regulates the fear. So you have fear, motivates an animal to get away from predators. Then you have anger. So the mama cow comes after you when you mess with her calf. That's anger. Then you have separation distress. That's a separate emotion from fear. Take the baby away from mom, and the baby's freaking out over it. That's separation distress. The dog is tearing up your house when he's home alone. That's separation distress. Then you have seek. Like one Labrador Retriever, all he wants to do is chase the ball. Then another Labrador Retriever is a heavy set one, makes a great service dog. One's a high seek, one's a low seek. And then you got sex. Then you got mother-young nurturing and caring. You can have that cow that will run you off when you mess with the calf, but she doesn't bother to lick it. They are separate. traits, and then you have play. I really, really like the Jack Panksepp emotional systems. And you get a behavior problem, you need to figure out, which system's involved. In cattle, for example, you can get cattle that's high fear. When you measure its temperament, it runs out of the squeeze chute really fast. That has nothing to do with whether or not she's going to attack you when you mess with her calf. And GPS experiments with cattle have shown some cows will climb these hills and really get out there and graze, and others are too lazy to climb up the hills. One's a high seek, another one's a low seek. There's actual papers on cattle's willingness to get out and graze and climb up hills. All right, further research shows very clearly that animals have emotions. You might want to read Gregory Burns' book on doing MRI scans on fully conscious dogs. Very much fun to train them to lay still for 15 minutes. A lot of hot dogs. And when he first started his research, he was sneaking them into the hospital at 3 o'clock in the morning. Oh, now he's got his own scanner to do it. But what it showed is, yeah, they got emotions. They smell their favorite person. The reward centers light up. Do animals feel pain? Yes, of course they do. But there's still some people that don't think they feel pain because they say, well, I castrated the calves and they're out grazing and drinking water. Well, this is because cattle and sheep, horses are prey species animals. So when they're herding, they don't tend to show it. You want to study their pain behavior, spy on them with video cameras. And mammals and birds will self-medicate for pain. That's called a self-medication experiment. So yes, they do definitely feel pain. Now, there's one kind of pain that maybe they don't feel. The bull doesn't know what he's losing. That might be something that might be different. This is some research one of my former students did. What do dogs need? People come to me and they go, oh, let's build this fancy-dancy animal shelter. What they really need is they need people. They need a person to take them out every day for 45 minutes and give them a really good time. And if you do that, the dogs in the shelter are going to be much less stressed. And do thunder search actually work? The pressure garment, that idea came from my squeezing machine. Because when I went into puberty, when there's some kind of allergies here, when I got into puberty, I started having horrible panic attacks. And exercise helped it. My pressure machine also helped it. You can read about that in Thinking in Pictures. And the thunder shirt, or the pressure garment for dogs, helps on the separation distress. Lower heart rate, less facing the door. Now, down at UC Davis, they've been doing some very interesting experiments on dumb foal syndrome. You see, you got John Mattingly's got a paper that goes, what keeps the foal from galloping when he's inside the mare? Because he's kind of anesthetized. And the pressure of birth, wakes him up. So what they found with some of these dumb foals, and it's also been found with other animals like cattle, that if you squeeze them around the chest, you can wake them up. Really cool. Really simple, really, really cool. That's the kind of stuff I like. And it might even work on baby pigs that are acting kind of comatose. Okay, a brain can be more thinking, or a brain can be more social emotional. I'm always liking to link animal stuff to autism. I love this paper. Solitary mammals provide an animal model for autism. Okay, lions are more social than panthers or leopards. There's genetic crossover. Are panthers and leopards defective? You see, in the milder forms of autism, it's just normal variation. Now you start getting speech delay, that's obviously an abnormality. And then we've bred dogs to be super friendly. Genetic crossover with Williams syndrome in people. Go on to Google Scholar, type in dogs and Williams syndrome. And then I found another paper in 2018 on genomic trade-offs. Is autism and schizophrenia and possibly epilepsy the price we pay for a big brain? You see, you get early overdevelopment. You get all the geek stuff back here. Art, music, all that kind of stuff. Schizophrenia is a lack of development. And I'm an extreme visual thinker. Everything I think about is a picture. Now, another kid may be the mathematical mind. They think in patterns instead of pictures. And then the third type is a word thinking mind. And we need to have all the different kinds of minds. And I'm getting concerned that our educational system's draconian algebra requirements. is locking out a lot of the visual thinkers. Believe you me, you don't need algebra to be a veterinarian. I was just down at the UC Davis talking about that. We've bred dogs to be hypersocial. You give a wolf a puzzle box, get a piece of meat out of a box, he'll just go do it. The dog's too busy asking us for help. You see, because we've bred it to be hyper social. And wolves, you stare down a wolf that's considered a threat. You see, we've bred dogs to be different than wolves. Now, there's some old experiments that show very clearly that these different parts of the brain work for different emotions. 20 years ago, I wrote one of the first papers that introduced this into the animal science literature. And I used to call it the F-word paper. And it is a proper scientific word. And you stimulate the fear center, you're going to get fear reactions. And you destroy the fear center, rats no longer fear cats. Wouldn't live very long if you were a rat if you didn't fear cats. The animal loses all its fear. Now, the basic thing I want to show on this slide is when you force a horse or some other animal, you just force it with rough training methods, the cortisol levels and the fear stress go way up. I am absolutely against rough training methods. And it hurts the high-strung nervous genetics like the Arab horse more than it would hurt calmer genetics. And when you train animals to cooperate with what we do with them, then you're not going to get all the fear stress. And here are the antelope who trained the untrainable. It took 10 days to train this very flighty animal to tolerate a sliding door opening. It would orient like that. Well, that's all we moved it. As soon as it oriented, then the brain makes a decision. Do I keep watching? Or am I going to jump against the wall or do something else really bad? But we managed to train them, and we got almost baseline levels of cortisol out of them. There are lots of good advantages to good stockmanship. Good stockmanship is a skilled job. It should be getting a lot more credit. But what I find is people want the thing more than they want the management. Same thing in education. Oh, we're going to put internet in all the schools and make the schools wonderful. Well, it didn't. That doesn't replace good teaching. And I know there's been a lot of teachers' strikes going on right now. And I was looking at some of the pay for teachers. It's below meatpacking plant wages. One thing I was just reading on the plane yesterday. You get a country like Finland that has extremely good education. Teaching, the status of teaching is right up there with doctors. Well, another thing I've been following is artificial intelligence. And there's some fancy doctor stuff like radiology and oncology is going to get replaced by computers. That's not going to replace frontline teaching. And while I'm talking about artificial intelligence and a person with autism is a bottom-up thinker. Concepts are formed by looking at specific examples of things. I'm also an associative thinker. Well, I fly all the time, so I'm always like, troubleshooting like the Southwest engine problem. And when I did my TED Talk 8 years ago, there had been a bunch of big plane wrecks, and I could summarize it with one word, tail. It either fell off or really important steering stuff broke. Now I've been looking at the engine stuff, and I was looking at this picture in the Wall Street Journal, and I go, oh, looks like cardboard out of the book boxes. That didn't exactly make me feel too good. So the next time we go on a plane, we gotta wonder how good the book boxes are today. And we got the perfect cardboard over there that came in, looks exactly like this corrugated material they put on the engine. Now, for the engine cover. I can understand why they did it, but maybe they're pushing things too close to the margin on fuel economy. This is where people don't know when to stop. And it's exactly the same principle where people go crazy over-selecting for different traits in animals and get into real problems genetically. They don't know when to stop. And everybody's fixating on the fan blades. Maybe they better start looking at the engine cover. It looks like it's made out of a beehive. And I've got a piece of cardboard over there tonight. Brad picked it out of one of the boxes. It's like that thick, and I go, yep, it looks just like it. And I can understand the engineering logic of that kind of material. Very light, very strong, as long as you don't damage the membrane on each side of it. So I can see why they did it. But I just designed a test stand for testing those engine covers. I know just the guy who can build it for me too, and he's probably on the spectrum. But the point I'm trying to get across is, you need visual thinkers, you also need the mathematical thinkers. Take something like the iPhone. Steve Jobs was an artist. The engineers had to make it work. You see, you've got to have both kinds of minds. And boy, they need some visual thinkers for risk analysis. Because when I found out why Fukushima broke, I'm going, you gotta be kidding. You put the emergency cooling pump with an electric motor in a non-waterproof basement when you live next to the sea. That's what happened. Well, that's not too smart. Okay, animals can acclimate to different things that we do. You know, you take them in a trailer, get used to it. Make sure your horse's first experience with a trailer is a good experience. Let's use something nice and big and long and easy, like a big stock trailer, when you first introduce it, so we don't have some crack up in a 2-horse trailer, because it's very hard to get rid of those fear memories. They can pop back like a PTSD. Fear, proper scientific word. Animals that are afraid of people are less productive. This is extremely well documented. Now the good news is cattle handling has gotten better. One of my students did a survey of big feed yards in Kansas and Nebraska, showed things had gotten a whole lot better. Here in California, a survey was done, and what it kind of showed is some ranchers are doing just great, and some have still got the old attitudes because the average prod score wasn't too good. Animal memories are specific because they're sensory-based. It's a picture, it's a sound. Like, for example, a diesel-powered equipment is bad and a gasoline-powered vehicle is good. They can make those kind of associations. If you habituate a horse to a blue and white umbrella, that doesn't transfer to tarps or flags flapping around. They look completely different because it's a picture. Let's talk about some common problems horses have. Bucking when you change gaits. You know why? It's a different feeling picture. The saddle feels completely different at each gait. So when you're first training it, you see if the tail switches when you change gaits. Let's stop before he blows up. Let's just stop. Another thing that can happen is you can have people abuse a horse with a jointed bit. And if he's been abused with a jointed bit, you can sometimes start a new file folder in his brain by using a solid bit and he'll be just fine. Because you've opened up a new file. Jointed bit's bad, but a solid one-piece Western bit feels totally different. It's a sensory-based world. This is one of the things I really want you thinking about that. But think about it. Umbrellas, I just want to go back to, umbrellas and tarps, they look totally different. Animal thinking is specific because it's sensory-based, it's not word-based. Get away from words. Because when you think in words, you overgeneralize too about problem solving. It's specific. And this is a picture that a young autistic man sent to me to show how all his thinking is pictures in his head. And the HBO movie did a great job of showing how I think in pictures. Make sure your animal's first experience at the vet, the horse trailer or whatever, or a new pasture or something is a good first experience. This horse was terrified of black hats because during a veterinary procedure, somebody chucked alcohol in his face. And the person that did that had a black hat on. White hat's fine, black hat bad. Animals will often tune in or associate something they either see or hear when something bad happens. When I put the hat on the ground, it was less scary. But when I moved the hat closer to my head, it got scarier and scarier. I could just feel the horse tense up. Maybe men with beards are bad. Animals tend to tune in to some, obvious thing about the person. Maybe white veterinary coats are bad. So then maybe just take the white coat off. Or maybe long hair is bad. Horses will also be less fearful if they have a familiar person with them. That familiar person can help calm them down. Animals make categories. When I'm on the leash, I protect. And when I'm off the leash, I can go play. So if you're working with service dogs, it's really important to have clear vest on work, vest off is play. So don't take your service dog and roll it around on the floor when it's got its vest on. You need to have clear categories. And that dog needs to have time off where it can go and play. Man on the horse, man on the ground. In the mind of the horse, that's two different things. So if you have a Mustang, for example, that might have been abused by people on the ground, he'll be fine for riding. But where he may have problems is with people on the ground. You see, that's a different category. I went to a prison that was training Mustangs, and the horses were afraid of the guards because the guards wore Western wear. The prisoners didn't. The prisoners were the good guys. The guards didn't like it when I told the prisoners that the guards were the bad guys because they were dressed Western. But that's the kind of associations horses will make. Rapid motion, it makes dogs chase, and it can make horses bolt and get scared unless you specifically train them to tolerate certain things that move rapidly. Now this camera that was used in the movie, it moves so slow, they don't even pay attention to it. It's like weird. Okay, you wouldn't want to be galloping down this road on your horse and get dumped off when he gets to that lid. This is the sort of stuff that you need to be looking out for in the environment. Be a good observer. You should have picked that up before you went riding. Chains hanging down in chutes. Why after 44 years I still have to talk about this? Because people are not removing them. Non-slip flooring. I can't emphasize the importance of a non-slip floor in an animal facility, in a horse trailer, a horse stock, a veterinarian, because animals panic when they slip. Now let's see how good you are at observation. How many people noticed that that animal was looking at the sunbeam? That's the kind of stuff I want you noticing. I want to teach you to be a better observer. Yes, anything wrong with that puppy? It's in the brace position. Yeah, when I do talks to the veterinary students, I say, have the owner bring in a bath mat from home with a rubber backing that the puppy's used to. Put it on the table, then the owner takes it home and you don't have to clean it. And that gives the dog a non-slip floor. But look, it's a brace position. That's not very nice for the dog. Behavior principles of restraint, sudden jerky motion scares. Another thing is you're holding an animal, especially a small animal, it struggles to just squash it. And one of the problems they had showed up in the survey here in California is they had more vocalization and mooing going on in hydraulic squeeze chutes. That's not true in the big feed yards. Now, a lot of the big feed yards have gotten more into beef quality assurance and working on their handling. Okay, examples of extreme fear behavior. Horse spooks at the show. Cat goes ballistic when it sees a dog. Now you can have animals that have a flighty temperament and you've worked really hard on your stockmanship, doing all kinds of good stockmanship, and then really calm, and you don't see the temperament. Now I was talking to a rancher about that, and I said, yeah, but if a hot air balloon lands in your pasture, and you know what he said? That actually happened at my ranch. And they went through the fence. You see, where you're really going to see that genetics is when you suddenly introduce the novelty. That's when they'll show the genetics off, where the Holstein will barely flinch and an Arab horse is going to go through a fence. Something new, attractive if they can voluntarily approach, scary if you shove it in their face. Here's the cattle coming up and checking out the clipboard. And if you want to see a really cool video, go online and use keywords remote-controlled car and cattle. And put the remote-controlled car out in the pasture and they run from it. Then they start to chase it. It's crazy. They start running after it. And then when it stands still, they all come up to it, and then when it moves, they jerk away. So they're alternating between fear and seek. There's actually a switch in the brain. They can alternate back and forth between fear and seek. I used to call that curiously afraid. Well, they found the switch that can make an animal curiously afraid. Okay, here are two places I worked in when I first started. The old Swift plant in Arizona and the feed yard out in Maricopa, Arizona. And a question I get asked all the time is, do those cattle know they're going to get slaughtered? I found they behave the same way in that Swift plant as they did at the feed yard. And look at how low that fence is there. That's Brahma Cross there. They could have just jumped out. They were very capable of jumping out. They just didn't. They knew they were going to get slaughtered. They'd be jumping out of there. And the stress levels in the two places are just about the same. They can range from really high to really low, depending on how good the handling is. Okay, a lot of stress at a place like a slaughter plant is simply novelty. It's a novel environment. You'd also get a lot of stress sale barn because it's a novel environment. Now there's a trained show heifer they used in the movie, and that's Claire Danes sitting there. And they wanted to get a PR picture of this heifer licking me. So I kneel down to let the heifer to lick me. And the next thing I know, I've got a stereoscopic view of her underside as she goes to jump on top of me. And what had happened is they hadn't trained into reflector boards. These are styrofoam panels used for lighting. So imagine a 4x8 white panel and they go like that with it. Well, they had assumed that since this heifer was fully trained for white box trucks, she'd be fine with white styrofoam panels. Box trucks don't move in the same jerky manner that those panels moved. Also, they tell you they're coming. They're very light styrofoam. You can flip them all around. No truck moves like that. Now, the thing is, what's novel for one animal is old home for another animal. These bulls are living amongst all these whirligigs. But when I got out of the car, they took off because that was something novel. And this pig is checking out the plastic booty because only visitors wore plastic booties. You see, that's attraction there to novelty. That was novel for that pig. And down in the Philippines, the cattle live on the highway right-of-ways and they've seen everything, nothing scares them. Bikes can be bad. Silent, sneak up on you. You want to get horses used to bikes. Gradually just walking them around, stationary, introduce them gradually. If you're going to be doing therapeutic riding, wheelchairs, strollers, other types of things, introduce these things gradually so that nothing scary happens. Now, can an animal actually get PTSD? I think they can. This is the first scientific paper actually used that word in the Journal of Animal Science. Almost couldn't believe it. And beef cows that had previous experiences with wolves and wolf predation got really freaked out and really stressed when they saw German shepherds, smelled wolf urine, and heard wolf howls. And the cows that had had no experience didn't do much to them. Now there's an animal that somebody tried to train by tying it up to a post. I am not a fan of this sort of stuff. And you do this to the high-strung genetics, you wreck it, because that animal pulls back and stays scared. You do that with a Holstein heifer. Holsteins are so calm that it's maybe almost okay with a Holstein heifer. Little foals, you want to get them gentle, just stroke the mare, and then just reach over and stroke the foal. Don't be grabbing it. And stroke it. Don't pat it. Stroke it. Stroke it. Make it feel like the mother's tongue. And that was one of the crazy cattle that was in one of my original studies 20 years ago on temperament. We did some of the first work on cattle temperament, and we found that animals that go berserk when you handle them had lower weight gains. But the thing I want to warn you is don't over-select for temperament. You over-select for any trait, you will wreck your animal. Whether it's an appearance trait, a production trait like weight gain or maybe milk production, or it's a performance trait like high-speed running. And I just want to show you some genetic stuff because I get asked all the time, how can I be involved in slaughtering animals and care about them? Well, I have a lot more problems with some of these genetic things. People breeding animals that have all kinds of problems. I just want to show you how breeding for something really simple like tameness can change an animal in unexpected ways. This is Belyev's Russian fox. These are very old experiments, very famous experiments. And you see how lanky and slender he is? And after 20 generations of selecting for gentleness, they got a heavy-set border collie fox dog. See, look at your difference here. Long and slender, snarly, heavy-boned, black and white. You've now domesticated the fox. But then the problem is you overdid it and you got epilepsy. Yeah, you've got to be really careful on behavior traits because you can end up with epilepsy. And these are deer, red deer in New Zealand. 40 years ago, 30 years ago, there'd be no way I could have gotten in this pen with these deer. That's 30 years of selection for temperament. Already started the domestication, and they seem to be just fine. You overselect for any trait, you're going to get problems. You can get lameness, excitable temperaments, lose disease resistance. There's always a price. Everything is a trade-off. This is a hard concept for people to understand. Now there's a laying in. She looks really pretty when she's young and looks like a rag when she gets older. And that's not the cage that does that. It's genetics. And in my book, Animals in Translation, I write about these really nasty broiler breeder roosters. Well, I'm happy to say that the chicken breeders actually have fixed the problem. The thing that's bad is they haven't told anybody about it. And they haven't published it in the scientific literature. And the only reason I know is because we were doing animal welfare auditor training, and I went out and I saw the rooster. And look at the difference between a layer and a broiler. You know, the meat chicken, the big, heavy, white chicken. And there's a pig with bad leg conformation. This was caused simply by selecting for rapid weight gain, leanness, and thin back fat. You know, horse people, I'm not letting you off the hook. What's with this stupid small foot thing? You know, I'm going to be bashing a lot of stuff like this because I think some of this is some of the worst animal welfare stuff. And that's not pretty in steers to be that post-legged. That was a bully to have trouble walking. That's 2 years ago, taken at our Colorado State Fair. Ought to be ashamed that you're breeding an animal that post-legged. You need to start using a leg conformation chart. You start just going crazy, selecting for some of these other traits. I don't know why it messes up their legs, but it does. And that is crooked claw, defect in cattle. Normal when they're young, and they grow up, they cross their toes. Bulls that have that are not going to be able to climb up these hills very well. And pretty paint, you put two of these together, you're going to get deafness, you're going to get all kinds of problems. This horse, if it was a human, would be diagnosed with Tourette's syndrome. Every 30 seconds it flinched for absolutely no reason. No, it's pretty, but please don't be breeding these problems. Well, other pigs ate that ears because they just bred for leanness. This is an old slide. This is a 20-year-old slide. Fortunately, they've corrected most of this problem. But the mistake they made is they just bred for leanness and rapid gain, and they ended up breeding a mean, nasty pig. Now, nobody would do that on purpose. This is what I call bad becoming normal. And bad becoming normal happens slowly, and people don't realize it, unless they have other animals to compare it back to. And that is going overboard on muscles on cattle, to have cesareans. Fortunately, we don't have, well, that's a pig from Germany that went a bit overboard. They bring them to the plant in a Mercedes-Benz or a BMW, hauling a small trailer. And this is the Chinese pig, bred for repro. Tons of little piggies. You see, that's breeding the other way. And there's always trade-offs. For example, on these sheep, a sheep that have twins have lower immune function. The ewe that has a single lamb has higher immune function. See, there's a trade-off. Everything takes energy. Nothing is free. Well, there's some other weird pigs. That's what the bulldog used to look like. And how did we get to that? Can't breathe, can't walk. And if you go on to Google Images and you type in Bulldog's Dilemma, that's what a bulldog looked like in 1938. All right, then we go back to that. Yuck. And you see, part of the problem is that the breed standard was a verbal standard. Maybe the breed standard, if it had been this picture, they wouldn't have gotten into this mess. It's a verbal standard. I've read it. But that's a functional dog. This is going to have breathing problems even after it has surgery. I've seen pugs so flat that they couldn't, after a couple of surgeries, they still couldn't breathe. And that, please. I only found out about this last year. I hope you're shocked. And if you want to see more of these ghastly pictures, go on Google Images and type in extreme Arabian horse. And you can do that on your phone right now. And if you type in intelligent Arabian horse, you get totally different pictures. But you see they're just breeding for the dish face to the point where you have a deformity. I just couldn't believe it when I first saw these pictures. I'm going, you have got to be kidding. I can't, yuck. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming. Thank you for coming.